We're about to begin our service. If I could ask that everyone please take a moment to turn your cell phones to their silent mode before we begin. Conducting our service today is Rabbi Michael Schwab.
As the casket is being lowered, I'm going to recite from Psalm 121. Shir Lamalot, Esayin Elamim Me'aynevo Esri, Esri Mim Adonai, Osa Shamayim Ba'aretz, Ayiten Lamot Raglecha, Ayanum Shomrecha, Hinilo Yanum Velo Yishan Shomer Yisrael, Adonai Shomrecha, Adonai Tzilcha Yad Yeminecha, Yomam HaShemesh Li'akeka Me'areach Malayla, Adonai Yishmarcha Mikol Ra Yishmor Et Nafshecha, Adonai Yishmor Tzicha U'Boecha Me'ata Yad Olam. Song for Ascents. I turn my eyes to the mountains. From where will my help come? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. God will not let your foot give way. Your guardian will not slumber. The guardian of Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. God is your protection, a guardian at your right hand. By day the sun will not strike you, nor the moon by night. God will guard you from all harm and guard your life. God guards your going and your coming, now and forevermore. Al Mikoma Tavo V'Shalom. May Shoshana Bat Yisrael V'Bracha. Those Bolshon go into God, into peace. And let us say, Amen. In a moment before they place the vault cover, I'm going to add some Israeli earth to represent her eternal connection to both the people and the land of Israel. There's also Israeli earth inside the casket as part of the ritual Tahara, the preparation. As the vault cover is lowered, I'm going to recite from Psalm 33. Ein hamelech nosa b'rov chayil gibur lo yinatzeh b'rov koach shek yasus lichua v'rov chelo lo yimalet hine ein Adonai el yireav v'miachalim lechasdo v'atzil mimavet nafsham u'chayotam b'ra'av nafshenu chikta l'Adonai ezreinu maginenu hu Kivo yismach libenu kivashem kocho vataknu. Yichas techadonai alenu kasher yichanu laha. A monarch is not delivered by a large force. A warrior is not saved by great strength. A horse is a false hope for deliverance, for all its great power provides no escape. Truly the eye of God is on those who revere, who wait for God's faithful care. We set our hope in God, our help and our shield. In God our hearts rejoice, and in God's holy name we trust. May we enjoy, Adonai, your faithful care, as we have our hope in you. Amen. In memory of Rose, I will now recite from Psalm 15 about a person of integrity. Mizmor David, Adonai miyagor ba'olech, hamishkon b'har kodshecha, holech tamim u'po, al tzedek v'dover emet bilvavaho, uragal l'shono lo asal reu ra'a, v'cherpa l'nasa al krovo, mizeh beinav nim'as, v'etirei Adonai yichabed. Nishbala Ravilo Yamir Kaspola Natan Beneshech Vishochad Anakilo Lakach Ose Ela Lo Yimot Le'Olam. Do we deserve to enter into God's sanctuary? Can we merit a place in the presence of God? Live with integrity, do what is right, speak the truth. Have no slander on your tongue, do no evil to others, do not mistreat your neighbor. Spurn those who are contemptible, but honor those who revere God. Never retract a promise once made, though it may bring you harm. Lend no money at unfair weights, accept no bribe against the innocent. Make these deeds your own, then you shall stand firm forever. We're now going to chant Psalm 23, and if you'd like to join, you can read from the pamphlet that was handed out, the English, after I recited in Hebrew. Mizmor David. Adonai roi lo achsav v'nodesh yarbitzeni al mei menuchot unahaleni nafshi yeshovev yancheni v'maglei tzedek l'man shemo gam ki elech begeit al mavet lo ira ra ki atay madi shiftecha mishan techa hema yenachamuni taroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorai tishanta v'Hashem en roshi kosi revaya Aktova chesed yirifuni kol yemei chayai v'shavti b'beit Adonai li'orech yamim. In the English, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Dr. Hillel Bavli wrote this following prayer. This is my prayer to you, my God. Let not my spirit wither and shrivel in its thirst for you, and lose the dew with which you sprinkled it when I was young. May my heart be open to every broken soul, to orphan life, to every stumbler wandering unknown and groping in the shadow. Bless my eyes. Purify me to see humanity's beauty rise in the world, and the glory of my people in its redeemed land, spreading its fragrance over all the earth. Deepen and broaden my senses to absorb a fresh, green, flowering world, to take from it the secret of blossoming in silence. Grant strength to yield fine fruits, quintessence of my life, steeped in my very being without expectation of reward. And when my time comes, let me slip into the night, demanding nothing, God, of humanity or of you. Our prayer, of course, is that her soul rest and Rosa's soul rest in peace. And of course, we remember her fondly at this time. I'm going to call upon Debbie to share some words in memory of her mom, and also to share some words that Melissa has sent her as well. We hope.
Anyone who knew my mother would say she was a tough lady. And she had to be tough to survive all the things in life that she did survive. I have always told people that she was like a cat. She had 9 lives. Her family fled Nazi Germany when she was a young child. She survived 2 bouts of cancer. She fell asleep while driving, ended up in a ditch, totaling her car, and walked away. She had numerous other illnesses, including Alzheimer's, and most recently she survived COVID-19. My mother never wanted to talk about her family history when we were growing up. And as the years passed, her memories became less clear, but we have been able to piece together part of her life, at least. We know she was born in Berlin in 1927. Her family left Germany in 1936. We are unclear on the reasons, but my grandfather, Israel Regensburg, was kicked out. He was a real estate investor, and the family had some means, and he snuck back into the country to be with his wife and 4 children, and he was arrested. My grandma Betty had to get him out of jail. I have a vision of her walking to the police station in Berlin, clutching her purse. And we assume that with the funds in that purse, my grandfather was free, but he was exiled to Brussels. And he was told in no uncertain terms that if he came back again, he would not be released from jail. When he could gather enough money, he sent for his wife and 4 daughters. My mother remembered that they lived in a very dirty, tiny apartment in the basement of Brussels. Her family was able to obtain visas from Lithuania, and with my great-uncle's sponsorship, they were able to emigrate to New York in 1938. They came on a freight ship. There were 6 of 16 passengers on the ship, and the conditions, my mother has said, were horrible and so bad that she never wanted to go on a boat again. Eventually, when they got to America, they lived in the tenements on Henry Street in New York, which were not quite as quaint as the movies would let you believe. She said they were dirty, crowded. She had to share a bed with her sisters, and the living conditions were not good. Eventually, the family moved to Chicago, and she met my father at Marshall High School, and they married after my father left the service in 1947. Well, my father went to Northwestern and had a successful career as a CPA. My mother could never forget the poverty of her childhood. She was always afraid that we would end up in the poorhouse, and I always believed that we were just a few steps away from this poorhouse. Although we grew up in a very average house in Skokie, and our neighbors seemed totally oblivious to the fact that we were all just steps away from ending up in the poorhouse. Growing up in my house in Skokie, we had lots of rules. My mother was fanatically clean as a result of the environment she had lived in growing up. The vacuum cleaner was always left out in our living room, and there was a long hose available to instantly clean up any speck of dirt or hairs which appeared on the meticulously clean floors or even on ourselves. We would be vacuumed. My father composed a little song about my mother to the tune of Secondhand Rose called Crazy Clean Woes that he would sing to her as she cleaned sometimes. She was also very concerned about our eating and bathing habits. I'm not sure that anyone else I knew, I'm not sure I've ever met anyone who had egg days and shower days. Egg days were Tuesdays, Thursdays, Saturdays, and Sundays. As a child, and now as an adult, I cannot eat eggs. On school holidays, when she left for work, she would leave us hard-boiled eggs on the counter for breakfast. My sister Barbara and I discovered a very good place for these eggs was the garbage disposal, which, like many homes in Skokie, was never used for fear it might break. Shower days were Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, which years later my sister figured out the algorithm for this, based on the shower cleaning schedule. So if you had a shower on a Tuesday night, Wednesday morning you were not making eggs, so you could go clean the shower. When you had eggs, and so that you always had to have those mornings free after shower days to clean the shower. I'm sure that these eccentricities were the result of her trying to balance work and family many years before most women entered the workforce. While my mother was not a religious person, she was very proud of her family lineage of prominent Orthodox rabbis. And she was culturally very Jewish. Israel was one of the few places in the world that she deemed acceptable to visit twice. My mother loved to travel. As a child, our annual 2-week August vacations were sacred. I don't know that we felt they were sacred. We would all pile into the back of an unair-conditioned car, and of course, since I was the youngest, I got the middle seat, and we would take long driving vacations. But as my parents became empty nesters, they traveled the world. They covered all continents, including their favorite, Antarctica. The only places she refused to visit were Poland, where my grandparents were from, and Germany. The most interesting thing about my mother's personality was a change that came over her with Alzheimer's when she was in her 90s. Alzheimer's is a horrible disease, and the beginning stages were very tough for both her, my sisters, and me. She became increasingly agitated as she began unable to do the simplest of tasks. Shortly after her 90th birthday in 2017, we moved her to Friends Center for Memory Care. In 2018 on Rosh Hashanah, she fell and broke her pelvis bone. Between that pain and her inability to communicate, she was extremely distressed and agitated, and we doubted that she would ever be able to leave the nursing home she was in for rehab. She did rally, and she was able to return to Friends Center. And while we also thought she would be devastated by her new lack of mobility and she was wheelchair bound, over time my mother was completely transformed. By our surprise, she was transformed into a happy, chatty, sweet old lady. She completely forgot about any of her problems and troubles. The caregivers at Friends Center would tell me how sweet she was and how much they loved her. A total change from her previous caregivers, who I would often find sitting outside her apartment because she had thrown them out. In addition, her whole life she was very, very thin and always afraid of getting fat. She claimed she hated to eat, she didn't enjoy food, anything that involved food she didn't want to partake in. However, as her activities became limited at Friends Center, she embraced her meals. And until the 2 days before she died, she continued to feed herself without leaving a morsel of food on her plate, to the amazement of the staff. In her first year in memory care, she did not gain her freshman 15, she gained 20 pounds. And I needed to buy her a new wardrobe and secretly hide her old clothes so she would not catch on to her new clothing size, which would have devastated her. While the last year was tough, we were able to FaceTime with her weekly, and my sister Donna and I were able to visit outside as permitted during the summer months until my mother herself contracted COVID in October, although she was asymptomatic. I had never seen my mother so chatty, smiling, and happy as she was during the last few years of her life. And especially during this past year, she had no worries about the election or COVID or coups. I would tell people I wasn't sure what planet she was on, but it seemed to be a good one. I do believe that despite the hard life she felt she had, she was finally at peace when she died, and it was comforting to see that she was finally doing happy. I will see if I got anything from Melissa, I'm not sure. If we got something from Melissa. Sorry, I found one. So this is from Melissa. She said that I'll always remember my grandparents' love for travel. Every time they'd visit a new country, they'd bring me back a doll from a different place, all of which I collected in my bedroom. When my family visited them in Arizona, I'd page through their collection of National Geographics and learn about their travels. Grandma Rose lived far away, but I always looked forward to visiting her. She wasn't always aware of her sense of humor, but she made me laugh. Always standing up for the little guy. She always liked the underdog. Later in life, making big statements like every place she's ever been is exactly the same except Antarctica. She was also full of helpful tips, like wearing the same house clothes all week so you can limit your laundry load. I followed this diligently in quarantine. I think of her often when I visit the Lower East Side, the neighborhood she grew up in, but would so rarely talk about. I know she was behind in school, having taken years off as a refugee, and needed to catch up in English. I know her family couldn't afford shoes, and how she often reiterated how they wore cardboard on their feet. Now I visit the neighborhood by choice, living my dream life in a city that was so hard for her. I owe a lot of who I am to her strength, bravery, and perseverance, and hope to one day visit Antarctica to see if it's really that different from every other place.
Debbie, really beautiful words. And Melissa too, of course. You're going to hear a lot of the same things, but hopefully from a different perspective. So I just want to begin by expressing my condolences, and those, of course, of my community and Debbie's community, North Suburban Synagogue, Bethel. To Bethel, to Rose's family, to her loving children, Debbie and Barry, to Barbara and Michael, to Donna and Mark, to her beloved grandchildren, David and Molly, Rachel and Ben, Lauren, Alexandra and Jacob, Melissa and Ashley and Jordan, and to her cherished great-grandchildren, Archie, Evelyn, and Harrison. And to all of Rose's friends and family, whether they're with us in person or in spirit, or on the live stream, my prayer is that the words and blessings we share today provide some measure of comfort at a difficult time. During the holiday of Purim, which we celebrated only a few days ago, we tell the story of a powerful man who plotted to wipe out the Jewish people. For Rose, though, this was not a story from the past, but a reality that unfortunately she and her family lived. She was born in Berlin in 1927, as you heard, during the rise of Hitler, and her family, through certain circumstances, was thankfully able to flee to Belgium in 1936, and even more fortunately emigrate to the United States in 1938, before the Germans seized control of Western Europe, trapping many of the Jews there. After a brief time living on the Lower East Side, the family did move to Chicago, where they claimed victory over Hitler by raising a Jewish family and perpetuating the beautiful traditions of our people, leading to the extended family tree that is before me and over the live stream today. Rose grew up in this context, having had to abandon their home in Berlin to go to Belgium, only to uproot less than 2 years later and take a very difficult sea journey to the United States in the storage hold of a cargo ship, something that, as Debbie said, soured her to boats for the rest of her life. Then she had to start again in a new home, in a strange place, learning a new language. All of this while her own parents also struggled to establish themselves and provide for the family, which was certainly not easy. I myself can't imagine what those circumstances were like. Yet with all of these challenges, Rose succeeded. She went to Marshall High School. She did well. She graduated. And then she met Herbert, and her life changed. She fell in love. They married after high school in 1947 when she was 20. Her daughters told me with a smile that not only did she love him for his wonderful internal qualities, but she would constantly remark how tall and handsome he was. They had a wonderful marriage and particularly loved to travel together, as you've heard, whenever they could, especially once the girls had all grown up. They rarely went to the same place twice, except for Israel, and tried to visit as many destinations as they could. When they traveled as a family, it was often by car, and then later they often traveled just the two of them. It was a really fun and exciting experience. They settled in Skokie and began to raise a family, being blessed with 3 wonderful girls. Although I'm told Debbie was supposed to be a boy, but she's great, just the way she is. While Rose was not a doting mother per se, she was always concerned with providing and helping her girls become successful. She was constantly worried that they were, as you heard, one step from the poorhouse, but she made sure everyone ate full meals, including steak for dinner, and she did a good deal of baking, including peanut butter and jelly squares, brownies, and cheesecake. She kept a meticulous house, as you've also heard, never hiring a cleaning person, preferring to do it herself. The vacuum was always on, and if you had a stray hair or crumb on your clothes, she would definitely vacuum you. At times, she served as a room mother or a brownie den mother, but mostly her concern was with her daughter's grades. She knew that the key to success was succeeding in school, and she pushed them to do their best. After Debbie reached 6 and was going to school full-time, Rose went back to work as a bookkeeper and accountant. She was very smart, and she was a very hard worker, and she took pride in her work. And though she had never been able to afford a 4-year college, she was excellent at her job, and when she finally had to retire, she needed to be replaced by someone with a master's degree, just to keep up. She took pride in her abilities and in her intelligence, and rightly so. When Herbert retired, they moved to Arizona and enjoyed retired life there. She was an excellent bridge player, I'm told, and she played to win. In fact, the two of them entered many a tournament and even had some trophies to show for their efforts. In addition, they loved each opportunity to see their grandchildren. She was happy when they were around and always baked her squares for them. When Herbert was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, they moved back to Chicago because she needed some support in taking care of him. She was truly dedicated to him and wanted to make sure he had what he needed. Though always a very proud Jew throughout her life, later in life she became a bit more religious, joining a shul in Arizona, and once she moved back, being active in services and Jewish activities in her retirement community. She was also very excited that she was able to be around to experience having great grandchildren, whose pictures and mention always brought a smile to her face. As you heard, and as you probably know, after Herbert died, she also experienced dementia. However, although it robbed her of her ability to remember, somehow it lifted some of the burden she carried in life, and she became less tough and pessimistic, and more joyful, smiley, and full of laughter. She always liked to eat, but as you heard, continued to find her appetite and really enjoyed mealtimes, both for the food and the company around her. She was often the last one to leave the meal. The family is indeed thankful that her last years at the Friends Center were indeed so happy. As we say farewell to Rose, We thank God for her life and the 94 years God gave her. Tizichra Brucha, may the memory of Shoshana Bat Yisrael V'Bracha be for a blessing. And let everyone say, Amen. Now I'm going to recite a prayer called Siduk Hadin, which is about the righteousness of God, even though we're doing that at a time when we question God's righteousness. Hatzur tamim polo ki chol racham mishpat el menavin avel tzadik v'yasharu. Hatzur tamim b'chol po'al miyomar lo matifa shali v'matav ma'amim v'chayam urit shol v'ya'al. Hatzur tamim b'chol maseh miyomar lo mataseh omer v'sech chesed chinam lanu taseh v'bizchut hanekad keseh akshiva v'aseh tzadik b'chol rachav. Hatzur tamim erech apayim u'malei rachamim chamon avachus na'alvot uvanim ki lechadon aslichot v'rachamim tzadik atana lamidu lachayot asher b'yadcha pikton kol ruchot chalil lecha zichronenu limchot yunainecha b'rachamim aleinu fikuchot ki lechadon arachamim v'aslichot Adam ben shana yeh olav shanim yichye ma yitron lo ki lo haya yeh baruch dayan ha'emet me'minu v'chayeh Baruch hu ki emet dino, meshoter hakol beino, meshalem adam cheshbono v'dino, v'hakol ishmo hodaya yitzenu. Yadanu Adonai ki tzedek mishpatecha, titzdak b'dvarecha, v'tizkeh b'shovtecha, v'ein lo aher achar midat shovtecha, tzadik ata Adonai v'yashar mishpatecha. Ten emet shofet tzedek v'emet, Baruch dayan ha'emet, shekol mishpatav tzedek v'emet, nefesh kolcha b'yadecha tzedek mara yiminecha, Rachim al plitat son yadecha v'tzomar l'malach keref yadecha. G'dol ha'yitzavarav ha'liyah asher necha pekuchot al kol drachei v'nei adam l'tei l'ishki dracha v'chvi mi'alalav. L'hagid ki asher Adonai tzriv l'ovat tabo. Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach. Yehi shem Adonai mevarach. L'rachum yichaper v'lo yashlit. V'yirba l'ashiv apo. V'lo ya'ir kol chamato. The perfect rock whose work we perceive reveals, a faithful God, true, upright, and honest. The rock is perfect in every way. Dare we ask God to account for any deed? God rules below, on high, causing death but giving life, bringing us down to the grave but raising us up as well. We know, God, that your word is good, but your judgments at times do puzzle us. And though we may brood over harsh realities, we place our trust in your righteousness and the love that remains with us forever. Have mercy upon us and strengthen us to maintain our courage at a time of sorrow. Adonai Natan, the Lord has given. Adonai Lakach, the Lord has taken. Yishem Adonai Mevarach. Praise be the name of God. Ve'ashov ve'afar, al art kashaya, ve'ruach tashu, el Elohim asher natana. The dust returns to the earth as it was, but the spirit returns to God who gave it. May Rose Bolshon's soul be bound up in the bond of life eternal. Send comfort, God, to those who mourn today. Grant strength to those whose burden is sorrow. And let us all say, Amen. Now I'm going to ask those who are seated, if you're able to stand. I'm going to recite the memorial prayer, and after that, we'll recite the mourner's Kaddish. El Malei Rachamim שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, ומעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מסתירים את נשמת שושנה בת ישראל וברכה, שהלכה לעולמה, וגם נמצא מנוחתה, אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בסתר כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור חיים ונשמתה. אדוני נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום משכבה, ונאמר אמן. Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and the pure to the soul of Shoshana, Bat Yisrael V'Bracha, who has gone to her eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. May she rest in peace, And let us once again say, Amen. Now I'm going to ask the immediate family and those who would like to join them to recite with me the Mourner's Kaddish. Yitzkadal, Yitzkadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'alma Divra Kirutei, V'amlich Malchutei, V'chaye Echon, V'yom Echon, V'chaye D'chol Beit Yisrael, V'agala, V'zman Kari, V'imru Amen. Yehei Shmei Rabba Mevorach, V'olam L'onei Olmaya. Yitbarach, V'yishtabach, V'yitpa'ar, V'yitromam, V'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, Levitalal, Shmei D'Kudusha B'rechu, V'ela Min Kol Birchata V'shirata, Tushbechata V'nechamata, Tamiran B'alma V'imru Amen. Yehei Shlomo Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chaim Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Oseh Shalom B'mramav, U'ya'aseh Shalom Aleinu V'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. This time it is our custom that we, her community of family and friends, put her to her final rest. And so in a moment I'm going to ask the staff here to place some of the earth so that we can take part in the burial. There are a few customs that we use in order to separate this from a normal act of shoveling and to help us understand the great act of compassion that it truly is. One is that we don't hand the shovel one person to the other like we're in a hurry or having a good time. The second thing is that you do at least 3 shovelfuls to show that you're doing a real act and you're not just doing one and rushing away. And the third, which some people do and some people don't, some people take the blade of the shovel and they turn it upside down for the first one, because you would never do that during a normal act of shoveling, and it reminds you of the act of compassion this truly is. We'll have the immediate family do it first, followed by everyone else. And obviously you're going to be very careful around the graveside.
We're going to ask everyone to sit down for just a couple of moments or step back while they bring the equipment in. Also, you need to be wearing your gloves if you're going to be handling the shovels. No one should be handling them barehanded. enter the grave.
When he was an infant?
Yes, I remember him.
Have you seen him since?
I'm not sure if I have.
So this is my friend Louise, and look what she has on her hat. A rose. And you know what's special about Louise? Her mother's name was Rose too. Yeah. Yeah.
The only thing as nice as having a mother named Rose is having a grandmother named Rose.
Well, it was Archie's great grandmother.
Oh my gosh.
Great grandmother.
You get all these young people.
I know. It's hard to keep those generations straight.
Oh my gosh, but you're absolutely, of course. I mean, everybody's noble.
Sometimes you forget that what generation.
Oh, but I was talking about, was I talking about you? I was talking about your mother when I talked about I'm cattle.
Boy, it's so wet.
I know, it's mind-boggling. I remember now, my father's funeral was in March also.
Was that March? I remember it being cold. I didn't realize it was March.
I remember that there was some snow and ice.
Yeah,
Because
a lot.
a plant who was pretty old was there. I don't remember water, but I remember wooden boards, so there
Yes.
must have, I mean,
It's always opposite. I remember the times.
yeah. Well, I think there's less walking maybe to get here. I didn't realize the class was so close to the road. I sure remembered.
Yeah. But you know what? Everything is so short. And there's no marker, there's marker, so
Yeah, well, we gotta find,
right, we
select the trees.
by those.
Uh-huh.
But
Oh,
we
yeah.
still, looked at
There's
the
that thing,
thing.
and then the thing over there. And it's kind of in the middle.
Yeah, we still walk around a lot.
Well, I'm always amazed when I find my parents.
Oh, they did.
Surprisingly hard to tell everybody from each other.
I know.
Where did Dave just go? Am I looking at him or looking at him?
Well, you know, with hats and glasses and masks.
Lauren, got glasses and a mask. Hi guys. Where's your hat? Where's your hat? Oh, I'm sorry that you left them to be
That's okay,
Saying hi to Lauren.
that's fine, that's fine.
We're kidding.
Just, I can see the phone and I got it.
Fair
As long
enough.
as the phone is
No,
there.
it's accounted for. Sorry. How are you guys? He's good. He's
How
good.
will be used to?
Yeah, it's like 2 weeks.
Very slow. Has to go to the bathroom really badly. Do you have any suggestions?
I would take them in the car and I would go maybe out to one of the restaurants because their offices are closer. I think we may have a porta potty right outside the office, but they're not letting anyone in the building.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries. So we said, we might have to go to the outside. Yeah.
So are you just gonna forget all your police house? So Mark will take the chicken home and get it from Mark.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Can you take
Wanna do the
yeah, you guys,
I want you to know that this mini Shura, this mini corridor represents the love of your family, friends, and always the presence of God as you make your way into the Shiva period. So if you'll kindly walk through this corridor of love with me, if you know the traditional words of comfort, you can say them.